What does it take to bring down a monster? As it turns out, a heck of a lot. Just ask the would-be assassins of Adolf Hitler. One of the biggest questions asked after the rise and fall of Adolf Hitler was, how was this allowed to happen? The answer, of course, is complicated. In 1921, Hitler was appointed leader of the Nazi Party. In 1933, he became Chancellor of Germany.
He has dinned into his people by constant repetition the conviction that they are a super race, headed for a great destiny.
By that time, 7 serious attempts had been made on his life. The first took place in 1921 when an unidentified gunman opened fire during one of Hitler's speeches. The same thing happened twice in 1923, and he was shot at on 4 separate occasions in 1932. One apparent attempt at poisoning the future Führer took place in 1930. Hitler and his cronies were known to regularly eat at Berlin's Hotel Kaiserhof, and after one meal, literally every last one of them got sick. It's not clear what happened, and no one was ever arrested in connection with the mass poisoning, but it's thought that Hitler escaped serious illness because of his vegetarianism. For the rest of Hitler's reign, he utilized food tasters to keep him safe. Famously, a secretary named Margot Volk was one of 15 girls drafted into civilian service, then put to work taste testing the Führer's food, just in case someone tried to poison him again. She was the only one to survive. The rest were killed by the Soviets during the fall of Germany. Predictably, some of the failed assassination attempts went poorly for the would-be assassins. Helmut Hirsch had been a member of the Jungenschaft youth group before it was dissolved by the Nazi regime. He ended up joining a group called the Black Front, who had previously splintered off from the Nazis. They believed that they could rally the German people to overthrow Hitler and end his reign of terror. And to those ends, Hirsch was convinced to plant bombs at 2 different sites in Nuremberg. He was arrested first, however, and although the US ambassador tried to stop his execution, Hirsch was put to death in 1937. In 1938, just days before Kristallnacht, a Swiss student named Maurice Beauvau tried to assassinate Adolf Hitler at a Munich parade. Switzerland, who stuck by their policy of neutrality, refused to intervene, and Beauvau was sent to the guillotine in 1941. Then there was Captain Josef Roemer, a communist member of the German resistance who helped plot a number of assassination attempts between 1939 and 1942. Even though none were carried out, he was still arrested and executed as a traitor. Georg Elser missed his shot by a matter of minutes. Acting alone, he hatched a plan to teach himself how to build a bomb, which he would plant in the walls of Munich Beer Hall, a beer hall that he knew Hitler was going to visit in celebration of his famous 1932 beer hall push. The bomb injured more than 60 people and ultimately killed 8, but it exploded just 13 minutes after Hitler had wrapped up his speech and left. Elser was arrested, sent to Dachau, and executed. Ewald Heinrich von Kleist was one of several men who volunteered to go on a suicide mission to kill Adolf Hitler. He was from a wealthy Prussian family with anti-Nazi sympathies, and when he was approached by Colonel Klaus von Stauffenberg, he volunteered to put on a suicide vest and carry out an assassination. When that plan didn't work out, he took part in the famous July 20th assassination attempt. The last surviving member of that plot, von Kleist, died in 2013.
Ewald von Kleist was willing to make a difference in the history of his country and ultimately the history of the world.
Meanwhile, Baron Rudolf Christoph von Gersdorff was a Nazi intelligence officer who volunteered to embark on a suicide mission to kill Hitler. He carried a bomb with him while showing Hitler through the Zeughaus Military Museum. He later explained, "I did not need much time to answer yes to the most momentous question that anybody had ever asked me." Von Gersdorff's plan failed when Hitler departed early, but he successfully prevented the authorities from discovering the plot. Truth can be stranger than fiction, and that's no less true for some of the failed attempts on Hitler's life. Henny von Treschow was a devoted opponent of the Führer who recruited would-be assassins such as Rudolf Christoph von Gersdorff, but he also had his own plans. One involved asking a military officer who was traveling with Hitler if he could take a case of Cointreau with them when they flew back from the Eastern Front. Packed in with the alcohol was a bomb and a detonator, but Treschow forgot about the cold weather. The detonator froze and malfunctioned. In 1937, a plan was concocted to assassinate Hitler as he gave a speech in Berlin, only this time the detonator failed to go off for a different reason. The German soldier who was supposed to set it off was accidentally locked in the bathroom and missed his window of opportunity. Even the Allies managed to foil one assassination attempt. Axel von dem Busch volunteered to carry a pocket full of grenades with him during a session modeling new overcoats for Hitler. The meeting never happened though, because the day before the suicide mission was set to take place, the train carrying the new uniforms was destroyed by Allied bombers.
Long live sacred Germany!
Operation Valkyrie was arguably the most famous assassination attempt made against Adolf Hitler. Masterminded by Klaus von Stauffenberg, the plan was to carry bombs into Adolf Hitler's inner chambers at the Wolf's Lair in East Prussia, place them under a table, and let the explosives do their thing. But this wasn't actually the conspirators' first choice. It was a contingency in case a number of other plans failed. They did, of course, and so did Operation Valkyrie, for a few reasons. For starters, von Stauffenberg only managed to arm one of the two bombs. The one he did get prepped and ultimately detonated had been moved, and much of the blast was blocked by heavy table supports. Nevertheless, after the explosion, the plotters were convinced that they had succeeded. After cutting power and communications to the Wolf's lair, they set in motion their plan to arrest Hitler's closest associates and install a new government. What really happened demonstrates pretty perfectly why it's always important to check that you actually killed the guy you want to kill. Hitler was very much alive, of course, and his reprisals were swift and brutal. There were only a handful of key conspirators in the July 20th plot, but by the time the smoke had cleared, more than 7,000 people had been arrested. Of those, nearly 5,000 were executed. World War II wasn't as black and white as it might seem at a glance. For example, it was the Germans themselves who made the most frequent attempts to assassinate Adolf Hitler. There was, however, one plan hatched by the British Special Operations Executive.
Down with Hitler. All the way down, sir.
Known as Operation Foxley, the plan was to take out Hitler with a single bullet. That wasn't always how the plot was going to go, though, as the Allies first looked at ideas such as bombing Hitler's personal train. In the end, that plan proved too complicated. The answer came when one of the Fuhrer's personal guards was captured and questioned during the D-Day landings. That's when they learned that anytime Hitler was staying at his home in Berchtesgaden, he liked to take a 10-minute walk from the main house to the tea house, where he would have breakfast. The Brits got the lay of the land, chose their snipers, and even made contact with a few inside agents. Every tiny detail was put in place, but when the plan was submitted for the final go-ahead, Allied officials stopped it. Why? Not only did they not want to turn Hitler into a martyr, but they realized that he was such an atrocious military strategist that if someone more competent were to replace him, ending the war would become a much more difficult task. It's easy to assume that anyone who wanted to take out Adolf Hitler was doing so because they wanted to put an end to the Nazis' many atrocities, but it's not really that straightforward. For some, such as Rudolf Christoph von Gersdorf, morality was at least part of their motivation. In his memoir, he wrote that he had always viewed Hitler as mentally abnormal, and decided to give his own life in an assassination attempt after hearing about the massacre of 15,000 Jewish men, women, and children at the Bereshev ghetto in Belarus. Still, even the motivations of the men involved in planning the July 20th attack are uncertain. While some certainly objected to the ruling party's anti-Jewish policies, others were more concerned about Hitler running Germany into the ground. Take Operation Valkyrie's Colonel Klaus von Stauffenberg, for example. His son Bertold later explained his father's motivations to the BBC, saying that he had supported many of the Nazis' policies. Bertold continued, "He was disenchanted with Hitler's strategic capabilities and that really, Hitler was a different type of person from what we thought acceptable. Perhaps a Holocaust museum puts it best. They say, many wanted to rescue Germany from catastrophic defeat brought about by Hitler's increasingly irrational management of the war." Here's a question. Hitler gave lots of speeches, so why not just pick up a sniper rifle and be done with it? Well, think of it this way. In 1941, when Major General Henning von Tresckow attempted to blow up Adolf Hitler's plane with a bomb smuggled aboard the plane in a case of Cointreau, he believed that killing Hitler was only the beginning. That's why the plot was dubbed Operation Spark, in the hopes that his death would cause Germany to sit up, take notice, and finally get rid of the Nazis. Meanwhile, General von Kluge once pointed out that it wasn't enough just to shoot Hitler, because someone, Heinrich Himmler for example, would just pick up where his predecessor left off. British historian Roger Morehouse says that there was a very good reason for thinking that would have happened. He explained to History Extra that it all goes back to the foundations on which the Nazi Party had been built. The idea that after World War I, Germany had been undermined by a cabal of Jews and socialists who brought about the country's ruin.
Signposts at city limits bear the legend, "Jews not wanted. Jews keep out."
That was a lie that had gotten scores of Germans on board with the Nazis in the first place. Not only would Hitler's assassination have been used to promote it, but it also would have given ample room for the new Führer to get up and running. In hindsight, the idea of someone wanting to give their life to take down Adolf Hitler might make them seem like a hero. As the war drew on and the Third Reich endured, however, they were seen as anything but. After the bombing of Hitler's headquarters failed to kill him, most of the conspirators were arrested and executed. That included Gunther Schmend, who was hanged from a meat hook in Plötzensee prison. He left behind his 26-year-old wife and their 3 children, including 4-month-old Axel. Life was not easy for them. Renate Schmid learned that her husband was dead when she received a package in the mail. The delivery contained his notebook, his wedding ring, and a bill. She was being charged for his execution. Now labeled a traitor widow, she and her family were shunned by neighbors and former friends. Axel later remembered that even his teachers looked down on him. At a parent-teacher conference called because of his poor math skills, Renate was told, "It's no surprise that he's bad at maths. He's the son of a traitor." Of course, the many fighters and conspirators who opposed Hitler are much more fondly remembered today. In 2014, the grandson of July 20th plotter Fritz Dietlof von der Schulenburg spoke to Newsweek about his grandfather. He He said, for him, acting against Hitler was a matter of decency. The plotters could have decided to do nothing, save their life, and played a positive role in post-war Germany, but they knew that somebody had to do something.